Well, again, we're not subject to open meetings law, so don't worry about it.
Okay, all right, great, fantastic. Uh, so, um, so up to this, up to this point, they have the ability to sort of step in and do something. And it's great that they have that now, but the problem, I think, looking backwards and looking forwards, is that this board is committed to doing something about putting trees back where they've been taken away. The previous planning board and the future planning board could say, well, it's the code doesn't require it, so we don't care. Now, I think the importance of legislation should enable them to do something about it now in the site plan process. But I would note that it'd be helpful if there could be some consideration to situations where you have sites that are largely developed and clear cut and do have green space on them that have been built for 30, 40, 50 years. And somebody wants to come in and do an adaptive reuse, where the planning board can say, okay, you want to change your use here, you need to give us some more trees, whether that's trees on site because you have the ability to put them on site, or trees off site to replace the fact that you 30 years ago decided you didn't want any trees on your property, and now you want to continue this use, which, even though the trees have been taken down long ago, still have an impact on the environment overall. There has to be some sort of way to calculate the impact of the loss of trees, whether that's sort of looking at, the percentage of property that's developed versus what's allowed, which we have a lot of places where you're allowed to have a percentage of impervious coverage, and the properties are way over that, right? Or they're the building coverage and they're way over that, and they want us to come in. They want to sort of come in and say, look, we're gonna fix this property, we're gonna keep on moving forward, but they're not gonna replace those any trees. So I mean, we have that now with like the 173, 175 North Highland, where I think people are saying, all right, let's put some trees behind there, check the OCA. You have opportunities to do that. I think that it's important. Adaptive reuse is great, but there has to be some consideration to the environmental impacts in replacing some of these trees that have been lost, even if they were lost 30 and 40 years ago.
Yeah.
So it'd be helpful to have that in the code.
Right. And so I think, that in terms of replacement, I did notice a number of places had, for want of a better term, a tree fund. So that if in fact the municipality, in fact, rather the developer or whomever is unable to replace trees, he can, sort of like what we do now with, recreation, or with what we do with affordable housing, or potentially with, parking in lieu. We can basically have a fund that they can contribute to, and that fund would be specifically dedicated to planting trees in, a village property or things like that. So it's another means of, if you can't get it here, you can get it, somewhere else. But clearly, emphasizing what has to be, what can be planted, and more importantly, frankly, what should not be planted. I think really becomes the critical thing, because I know that was a very big point that Erica was making, that there's, you get a lot of invasive stuff. Jaime, it was before your time, but I recall that J.B. Hernandez appeared before the EAC with one plan, I forget which one, and everything that he was putting in, Erica was going invasive, 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 invasive.
That may have been the 175 North Highland. I remember at one point there were issues about the trees, and that the majority, if it wasn't that one, I think I recall which one, it may have been, I could be confusing them, but there was one project where it was almost the entire, everything that they had recommended, Erica had sat there and said,
it was the Brandreth
no.
property. Wasn't it the Brandreth property? The furniture store and everything they wanted.
That's it. That's 175 North Highland. That's the one.
There was that one, and there was another
everything
one.
wasn't invasive, but if you don't know, you don't know. So it's an education.
Well, there was also, at the time they were redoing, they were going to rebuild Victoria Home. There was an issue there with regard to the trees that were going to be on the street and surround it. And those, I remember Eric was, those were all invasive. I mean, they were all like that. I do remember, I think that was the other one. There were those.
That may be the one that I'm thinking about, because I remember there was one, and that may be the project, or one in particular where she basically said, go back to the drawing board, and she gave them an entire list of trees to choose from. And when we went through the application process, they said, oh, well, this is what we were doing, you know, back in the day. And we just took the trees from there and we decided to go with those again. And we were like, no, well, we're doing it differently now. So I recall that as well. And
Well,
that was a big.
Something came
issue.
up. Another thing you may want to think about. Something came up today in the conversation. I guess there's like sort of 3 types of categories of trees. There's sort of like native trees, and then there are invasive trees. And then in the middle, there's this thing called a naturalized tree, which is a non-invasive, non-native tree. It's essentially complementary, not native, but complementary, and therefore not an invasive. And there, you know, on the Birchbrook site, there's a couple, like 3 or 4 very large Norway spruces, which are non-invasive, which are non-native, and are helpful to, you know, to the overall canopy and everything else. So, you know, accounting for those types of changes is important. I think a lot of the codes that you see essentially say that, you know, you don't have to replace dead or dying trees. You don't have to replace invasive trees. And so they sort of focus in on the, you know, non-invasive native trees that are either in fair condition or good condition. And that little middle piece, that sort of like non-native but also non-invasive tree, is something that is probably a category that the planning board or whoever is making the decision should be able to account for when they're determining what to replace. It would be, you know, I think it'd be very helpful. The Birchbrook site, like 70%, 75% of the trees are invasive. So I think, you know, for a lot of people who are going to go there and take a look at it, they'll say, oh, look at these trees, it's beautiful. But, you know, the other side is that they're mostly invasive. And I think that the assertion by the applicant, which thus far, I think the tree, you know, our arborist kind of agrees, is there's probably some clear cutting that took place, and essentially the invasives came and sort of filled the void that was created by that.
I do recall that was an issue when this originally came before us, that it happened.
Yeah.
The clear cutting, and that it allowed for, you know, invasive species to come in, and that's something that we don't want happening. We don't want to clear cut and then leave that open and have all this undisturbed land, because that just creates this situation for invasives to just move in.
Yeah, I mean, those invasives must have moved in decades ago, but
Yeah,
those trees are huge now. So
yeah, they don't
must have happened
spring up
decades.
overnight.
Yeah.
What's, just for my education, what specifically, can you give me an example of what species they are, just for my education?
Invasive tree, like Norway maple is the one I think that
Okay,
gets brought up the most. That Norway maple is the invasive tree that's talked about
Okay.
the most. I'm sure that there are others. I'm not an arborist, so I'm not really super familiar, but like a Norway spruce is a non-invasive, non-native tree.
Mhm.
And then I think there are like black locusts, which are somewhat, I think, naturalized. Well, I have them like on the Old Croton Aqueduct. There's some big black locusts, and they're maybe either invasive or semi-invasive, but they're not as bad as like other types, like the Norway maples, which kind of spring up everywhere. And
Mhm.
then there's, you know, there's other trees which are, you know, deciduous trees from this area that are not invasive at all. So, but I mean, it's a fascinating field. The arborist
Yes.
field is fascinating. There's a lot out there. So, you know, it's helpful to have that assistance out there. So.
We're gonna have to step up our tree knowledge game.
Yes.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of, you know, those are just a couple of pieces that I thought would be helpful to add to any sort of proposed legislation, because that'll, you know, being able to look backwards on projects that want to continue the use of a property where they just got rid of all the trees should not come, I think, you know, environmentally for free. They sort of say, yeah, well, there's no trees here now, so we're not cutting anything down. But
I mean,
they were all cut down at some point, and you know, it still takes away from the overall, you know, carbon footprint.
yeah. And I guess I'm thinking that it's just as justified trying to increase the number of trees as it is to put in a building code that increases the R value for insulation and makes buildings more, you know.
Yeah, oh, environmentally friendly, like more
Yeah,
sustainable.
yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a big
It's
piece.
the
of it, right?
same logic.
If
Reduce the
somebody
heat
comes
island.
through and says like, hey, we took all the trees and so we're gonna make this building more environmentally friendly by fixing the insulation problem, or we're gonna do thermal, or you know what I mean? Like integrating a tree policy for, rehab and redevelopment with some sort of sustainability and design might, be a way to deal with some of these problems.
Mhm.
But to allow properties that are, have kind of like taken away all the trees and done everything environmentally wrong because they were done 40 years ago and that was the practice, to continue to sort of, continue to move forward with this sort of bad environmental practice is probably not a good idea. We should, try to give a gentle nudge in the code and allow the planning board to give a gentle nudge to people, say, okay, what can you do to enhance this project?
Push them into the future where we
Yeah.
need to be.
I don't know, is this something that, would we want to incentivize something like that to try to get people on board with that? Or is that something that we just would want to, I guess, regulate going forward and just
That's a
require
good
it?
question, I think, for Stuart here. I mean, Stuart, have you seen any of these codes that dealt with sort of, not rehab projects, but I guess sort of like, not tree permits or anything that looks backwards at properties that have already been developed? Or is it always sort of like, if you cut it down a tree, that's when we start looking?
No, I mean, they vary. If you go upstate, they don't seem to be as much concerned in terms of the development as they are with regard, as I said before, just street trees and park trees. That's the big deal. Where do you plant them and how do you plant them? They're very specific as to how tall the trees can be and where they can be placed, particularly in terms of relation to utility poles and everything like that. They have there was probably one attorney who wrote it for like a huge swath of upstate New York, because if you do a search, they're almost identical, except, Victor, you should go up to the village of Victor, by the way, because it's actually, I seem to rely on them for some reason all along.
I've actually been there. I looked at a
But,
car that I couldn't find.
in terms of, incentivizing and things like that, there probably are ways in terms of, perhaps certain types of, let's call it internal improvements that we do within the village that we might be able to say to a developer, it would be helpful if you could do X, or do something more. I mean, we ask developers to help us with, Jaime, this, with certain sewer projects and with certain, water projects, and things like that, maybe reline something. I don't think there is any reason why you couldn't do something analogous to say, well, could you do this as well as making, as long as the condition has some connection to the project that's involved. I don't think there's a problem with doing that. It'll provide, benefits, benefits as well, that go there. But most of what you see in terms of, planning and zoning and things like that, obviously those are the projects that become before those different boards. But, if you look at what's potentially on our drawing board, there's some pretty big projects that are out there that certainly do require, tree coverage and things like that. If Hudson Step, gets itself restarted on State Street, I don't recall, what their plans say in terms of tree coverage and things like that, but that's obviously something to, that would be looked at. Hidden Cove, if it ever comes back, they have to restart the entire planning process. So that's certainly something to look at in terms of what they want to do in their particular area. But what I think is important is a more unified practice, because at least before Jaime was here, and when I was doing a lot of, the land use stuff, it was more, okay, that looks good over there, and maybe we should do that. There was much less of a view of, are we putting an invasive? Are we doing this? What kind of trees are going in? Okay, if you need to take these trees down, are you going to put X number of trees over there? That kind of calculation really it wasn't there. And I don't blame the prior planning board members, because they were looking to just, get, development and get things to go. But I do think now, it is particularly important. I don't know, Jaime, you're better to talk on this in terms of, the downtown work and everything that's going to happen with regard to the grant, but whether or not, some trees can come out of that $10 million might not be, bad from that perspective. But, but 14 Water is a good example of where we've been able to discuss with the developer putting trees off-site, because they're not going to be space on-site to do it. I can't think of other projects where we've done that in the village, to be honest. So, I mean, my hat off to Jaime, and Amanda, who's the land use council, because that's a big deal, because we haven't done that before. And particularly in an area where, there's less tree cover than there are in other parts of the village. And that's probably something that we want to look at, as Kate, to use your word, incentivizing a developer to do. And also, but not just incentivizing, but basically, as we have under our freshwater wetlands, if you're taking it away from here, you can't replace it, then it's got to go here, or a place that we tell you where it's got to go on a 1 for 1, 1 for 2, 1 for 3 type basis. I saw 1 or 2 municipalities, the replacement is basically based upon, DBH size, and determines the number of trees that you got to put in. And it can be, a whole swath of trees. Jaime, as to 14, is there some agreement yet as to the number of trees, or is that still something that's up, out to be discussed?
Yeah, I think that the agreement was that they have to replace 50 inches of DBH.
Okay.
And they're going to have to replace all of that off-site. So we have a list from the rec department where we're going to put those. I have about, I think I had space for about 150 DBH. And it looks like, based off of the conversation we had today with Birchbrook, that they're probably going to need to replace some of those off-site as well. So, so we might get more from them. And then, we're still waiting on comments to hear back from the EAC on 136, 140 Croton Avenue, but that's a site that has nothing, missing. It has nothing there on it, right? So it doesn't have any trees really cut down to speak of, other than a couple. But it's a big site, and perhaps some consideration should be, given to creating, some trees off site, since they won't have the ability to put them on site. And so I think that's what would be. I don't know whether like the planning board really has any leverage there at this point to do that, but it would be helpful. I mean, we have other properties. We have a property on Camp Woods Road that has a building structure that essentially, it's all parking lot and building, and they want to sort of take this 1-story building and turn it into a 4-story building, and keep the parking lot as is. They don't want to make any changes. They're only nominally keeping the footprint of the property in order to, I think, avoid some variances potentially. But there were trees on that site, and they're over what they're allowed to have in that district. So perhaps, if the planning board had the ability to step in and say, well, hey, you should give us some money in the tree fund, because you're not going to be able to provide them on site. I think, or if the zoning board had the ability to grant area variances where needed, with the caveat that, you have to do this off site. So I think it'd be helpful to have whatever tool in our.
I think you're right. And, it's interesting with the variance. For example, say someone is building something where they are looking to increase the impervious coverage and require an area variance to do it, because it's above the percentage in our bulk requirements. The zoning board might look at that and say, well, if you want to do this, then we need you to do that instead of just basically granting the variance or denying the variance. I mean, which could also happen. But that way, at least, contribute X to the fund, and that X is something that, would be, determined like, Dana, like we do in the fee schedule, where we basically say it's going to be, this amount for these, X, be it by DBH or by tree, and that's what gets contributed, and it gets put in, and it becomes a special benefit fund, which is just used for that purpose, and is something. But I do think, Jaime, getting to your point, that language lacks both in the zoning part of the code, chapter 270, because it's not there, and it's not under the tree ordinance here. So there's a lot more sort of marrying of those sections that is needed. My plan had been to have something for you folks tonight, but hope springs eternal, and of course this is the 1 month where February 1st is the first meeting. So we will definitely have something. My plan is to have it for March 1st, but to have it to you folks probably at least a week before, so you can look at it. And then I want to get your comments, and then Dana, we can work with Karen and the mayor to get it on a work schedule, so that
we might want to identify parts of the village that could most benefit from a tree fund. And
yeah, I think
it would
part
all
of
have
that,
to be, it would all have to be public village property, I imagine, but.
right, but I think part of the, I know there've been discussions. There was some discussions, Jaime, with regard to Paul, in terms of locations, and with regard to Bill Garrison, who's our rec superintendent. But you're right, there are parts of the village that are more in need of tree coverage.
Like you
than
look at
others.
Vets Park and it's just barren, I mean.
Mhm.
I think that,
Yeah, Veteran Memorial Park is interesting because it has these huge grassy hills that we have to take care of with no trees.
no trees.
And wouldn't the taxpayer benefit from not having to mow those lawns, or fertilize them, or what I mean? How many different ways would we benefit by just having
Grass
tree
is
coverage
grass is not good, I mean, I love lawns, but if we could replace some of it with like trees, but you have to make sure that people can get some sort of, I don't know what they use the lawn for and the grass, but they have to be able to get some sort of use out of it. But I think that if we can identify areas of the village that would most benefit from trees, then we can come up with some sort of plan. Because at 14 Water Street, you got these two kind of mangy looking trees, right? They're not nice looking trees. Covered in ivy, and they look like they're dying. And
Something that I've been working on the side with someone was looking at some of the LiDAR data that we have for the county for Ossining, to see where we might need trees and what the health of the tree might, the health status of the trees are. So no promises or guarantees that this is going to be a successful venture, but that's something that I'm looking into at the moment to see if we can identify particular locations that would benefit from it, and see what we can do with that. But that's something that is taking, that'll take a little time. But it's definitely something that's on my mind that I've been thinking about, since we've been discussing the tree ordinance and how we can approach these different projects. That's something we could potentially tap into in the next few months.
That could add a lot to the quality of life in the village at a very simple level, at a very basic level.
Yeah, I think, and look, it's always good to have a little public-private partnership where, somebody's coming in and they'd be happy to do this stuff, but they can't do it on their site. So, we'll help put it offsite, and that offsite change, the benefit to them, the dense development on smaller sites sometimes is a benefit to the environment because you're not disturbing forests.
Right.
Instead, you're putting the density where the density already is. But at the same time, you're sort of still providing the environmental benefit of adding trees, where they're needed, where there aren't enough of them now, where we can plant them. And so, if we can do that, and also, the taxpayer doesn't have to pay for it, that seems like, probably it's got some good, benefits. So.
And I think it might also help de-escalate some of the opposition sometimes that seems to arise up about any sort of development at all. When, if it can be demonstrated that there is care being taken for other effects, and that the developer has to cooperate in actually making the whole area better. Not that you'll ever de-escalate everything, but the people will understand that it's, there's good things.
It'll be a
happening.
good compromise. It could be a good
Right.
compromise. Yeah.
Right.
All right, so I'll get that to you folks by, about a week or so, at least before the next meeting, to look at it, get your comments, and do that.
I'm scheduled for March 23rd to present to
Yes,
the
I know
Board of
you are.
Trustees.
Yes,
So
I've already got it on my calendar.
All right.
One thing to note, revising the tree ordinance is easier than revising the zoning code, only because to revise the zoning code, it will require us to go to the planning board first to get their comments, then it comes back to the Board of Trustees. So it may be done in parts, but at least we'll start that process. But yes, I do know that you are there on the 23rd. I've seen those emails and got it all set. So
What are you talking about, Kate?
Trees.
Trees, awesome.
What we've been working on.
Okay.
So giving updates on trees and finalizing the open space in connection to the trees project.
If there was a way to bring the schools into this, kids love trees. So,
I think
and
we can come up with something. I think
you
there
know,
would be
especially little
plenty
kids,
of.
and if you could pull them into this and research types of trees and plant some trees. I mean, I know at Nelson we had that whole program where we put in a bunch of trees with funding from, was that state funding, Stuart, for Nelson? Was that, what
the
funding was
Nelson trees were that was a grant we got from the state
that? Yeah.
for the
So, I
city
mean,
park. That was a large grant that we got from them.
I mean, the parks seem the most obvious place for trees, right? And I don't want to forget Snowden either. And it may be
Right.
worth looking at our parks, all of them, village parks, and assessing which ones need more trees. How can we use the tree fund to improve those? And the most beautiful trees are on private property, right? I mean, I got a ton of tall trees. I mean, I got some big ass trees on my property. These 3 big evergreens that go back 100 years. They used to be all over my neighborhood. And, I think that the tree inventory is still a good idea too. I got some of the last sugar maples on Ellis Place on my property. Ellis Place was once lined with sugar maples. And, then you get these Con Ed horror shows. But, I think it's a really, who doesn't like trees? And I think if we could rally around trees and they're good for the environment, they clean the air. And I guess we'd probably have to pull Bill Garrison into this somehow, but because I just don't know where else we could put trees.
Well, I asked Bill Garrison about where we could get some trees. So his numbers that he sent me back in November were, he said 20 at the community center, 10 in the parking lot area by Open Door, 18 in Dale Park, 6 in Arthur Jones Park, 6 in Snowden Park, and 15 in Vets Park. So, I mean, right there, we've got a long list, which I think is super helpful. That doesn't include anything from Paul on street trees. And I mean, if it's integrated into the planning board process, I think it makes it even easier to sort of like start saying, okay, well, we have a wish list of what we're trying to get done here. And, you need to fulfill your obligations and pieces. So, here's where we start with, and then, like you said, Trustee White, to kind of work with Bill on, other places, maybe some of the things that are not on this list, and, figure out where
But
they can.
it feels like if we could see like that graphically, like this many trees here and here and here, and if part of the tree fund is then planting trees in these places and prioritizing where they need to go. But it feels like that sort of feeds into what Kate's going to talk about a little bit too. Because, you can come on and say we need more trees everywhere, but our ability to plant them is limited to the property we own. And you can certainly encourage property owners to plant trees, but then they have to be the right ones. So it's more complicated. Trees are complicated. A tree grows in Ossining.
Mhm.
But it feels like Bill's work with the parks could dovetail with a little bit about Kate's and our work with the tree fund. And it seems like a logical place to put trees is in these places that we've earmarked, Because the 2 trees at Water Street, there's 3 trees that are going to come down, right? Assuming this happens.
So there's 4 trees in total. One is a double tree. That's the nice one in the front. It's
Yeah.
Magnolia, I believe. And then there are 2 Norway maples that are growing in the back of the property. And there's 1 box elder tree, which is dying and sort of laying on its side now. So
Is there any way to transplant the Magnolia?
not in a way that'll keep it alive, probably. I mean, I don't think so. It's old, and
Yeah,
the likelihood of it surviving a transplant is very low.
yeah.
Even look, I have not asked that question specifically, but the comments that we've had from the arborists are that you really don't want to plant any trees that have a bigger caliper, DBH than like 3 to 4 inches, because the bigger they are, the more likely it is that they'll die. So there's sort of an age at which it's okay to transplant them or to sort of plant them, and after that point, they just, they're less likely to live. I can't imagine that tree would be very likely to live if they tried to transplant it.
Yeah, I'm looking at the trees on Google right now, and they're pretty big.
Yeah, and there was a house there, so that house came down. I want to
House fell
say,
down.
yeah, like 20 years ago, at least 20 years ago,
Yeah.
they took it down. So
I
those
don't know
trees
what
that were growing-
happened, but it was just taken down. It was just neglected, I think.
Mhm.
And the footprint of what they want to build is not that much different. I don't think, but not my not my area. Anyway. I sent you a picture of Water Street with that house there. Did you see
I
it?
did. I saw it. It was almost identical to the property adjacent to it. So
Pretty much, yeah.
yeah.
I didn't know because I know we've talked trees, if you wanted to talk about that MOU that Maddie sent around. I don't know if you had a chance to look at it with regard to the climate thing that we need, we'll need one person.
Yeah, I
from
spoke to
EAC.
Kate earlier today about it.
Okay.
What we need is somebody, at least one person from the EAC, and then I think the one person from Green Ossining,
Right.
for the CAPI, as well as the other one. So I did speak to Kate about, she said she's on board. So
Super.
so we're good there. And yeah. So there's some other stuff I got to follow up with Seth on it as well. But I've got to email out to him.
Yes, Kate, you will provide the village's sweat equity for this project.
Looking
Yeah,
forward
whatever
to
that
it.
means. It's
Whatever
4
that
staff
means,
members.
it's all good.
Yeah, there's 4 staff members and 2 volunteers. And so I'm assuming the staff members are like the manager, the assistant manager, Stuart, and myself. And then, whoever the 2 volunteers is, you and probably Seth. So.
Okay, I'll be gone in a couple of minutes. Thanks.
Sounds good. All right.
Another option for trees down there is the DPW building at some point, I imagine, but I think it's going to be a lot of hardscaping.
The new DPW building?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I saw they've been doing a lot of work at the site. I passed by because I live not too far from there. So I see that there's been a lot of, I guess, excavating or digging out of things.
I don't know about the excavating part. It's sort of like what do they call it? Like a lay down yard. So they get millings and they sort of pick it up and they move it around to another place or offsite. So I think
Okay.
last conversation with Paul was that, they're trying to clean it up a little bit. I think the other day because we had to do a walkthrough, but it'll probably fill up again and then come down again and fill up again until the actual property is transferred over. And that's not going to happen until the approvals are done. So.
Okay, and that's probably what I saw.
So
Okay.
I'm sure you have seen it get cleaner, but it's not to mean that it won't get dirty again before
Right.
any sort of transfer takes place.
But what you may see soon, Kate, is we're going to probably be signing soon an access agreement. So that will allow the developer to go in there and, start doing some of the work that they need to do. Hopefully that'll get signed very soon. I expect that the land acquisition development agreement will probably be signed on Thursday. So, which is a big deal. So, and then the access agreement, I know they're working on the brownfield application, which they've got in. They're now working with Con Ed to sort of
Oh,
get
good,
all that
good.
taken care of. So that's moving forward in that way.
You answered my question before I even got to ask it.
Wonderful. I'm going to take my leave of you folks now. If you wish to continue, go right ahead, but my ride awaits me downstairs.
Ah,
And I cannot keep the missus waiting.
you're carrying it away.
Yeah, don't do that.
Have a good night.
Right.
Are we done?
Kate, you're the boss.
I don't have any other comments. I think we are done. As far as identifying those areas that we could use trees, I will get back to you and let you know how the inventory project that I've been kind of working on goes. But yeah, in the meantime, I'm all set. How does anybody else have any comments?
Actually, I have a totally off-topic question I have for Victor. I see an old Singer sewing machine in your back behind you. I have one my mother used. It's been
This
sitting
is
in
my
my attic.
grandmother's. She
Well,
bought
it's
it in
been-
1951.
Is it working?
Katie,
Yeah.
are you trying to give yours away? Because somebody's trying to
No.
give one away on
No,
Facebook.
no. I want to find where I can get it serviced and get the new electrical parts because I've let it
good
just
luck
sit
with
there
that.
and it's time to make
Okay.
it.
Hartsdale, Four Corners
Hartsdale.
in Hartsdale. There's a
Okay.
sewing machine guy. That's where I
Okay.
took it to. That was
That's
before
exactly-
COVID. So, I don't know if he's still there because, the world's gone to poop.
Absolutely.
And then behind it, I have another sewing machine that's for leather work. And that's a walking foot sewing machine.
That's a,
And I have another
Yeah.
one in my, I found an old 1920 sewing machine that was on the side of the road in my neighborhood. It's in my garage.
How did you get that before I did, Victor?
Oh, you saw it?
No, I didn't see it. When was that?
I don't know.
We grabbed it too quickly.
It was next to Rose's, on Prospect Place.
Oh, okay. All right.
Yeah. So the guy went to a nursing home and they cleaned out his house.
My daughter has a new singer. So one of the,
and I
No.
could do that, but this
We're
one is a
two-year-old.
classic.
Yeah. Just so you know, if you put this in a trebuchet, you could probably send it across the river.
oh yeah, the old ones, they're solid. They'll last 100 years.
This is cast iron.
Yeah,
There's not a plastic part on it.
let's see. Yeah, mine is sitting right over there.
Yeah.
I sewed all my clothes on it when I was a kid, and then after my mother died, my father gave it to me and I haven't touched it. And then
Yeah,
I
so-
started looking at the electrical cords and they're just like totally
Yeah.
shot to hell, so
Yeah.
need
So
repairs.
four corners in Hartsdale,
4 corners.
right on Route 100. We're like you go to the Hartsdale train station
Mhm.
direction and and it goes up. So the road, so where Hartsdale, so where Route 100 crosses the road that goes in between the Taconic and the train station. It's in one of those shops. It's like 2 or 3 stores in from the corner.
I will look for it. Thank you so much.
It was the old Japanese fish market originally, I think.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, for your patience while I took us off topic.
Just a quick follow-up. So Kate, I remember I spoke earlier, so just put it back on the radar. Love to get those comments on 136, 140 Croton Avenue. When you get a chance, in 173, 175 Croton Avenue, which I think.
Absolutely. I will get those out to you tomorrow. I already have draft letters for those, so it just needs to be finalized and I can email it to you.
Okay.
All right. If no one has any other comments, I guess the meeting is adjourned. I say that like it's a question. All right.
So
Have a
moved.
good,
All right.
have a good night.
All right.
Good night.
All right.